Okay, so where we left off on Friday was just finishing talking about correlation. So now we're going to move on to experimental methods. Um, we're going to start talking about the experimental group and the control group. These are the two main groups you're going to have in any psychological study. The experimental group are the ones who you are actually conducting the experiment on. And it says here subjects in an experiment who are subjected to the independent variable. Excuse me. The control group are subjects in an experiment who are not subjected to the independent variable and who may receive a placebo treatment, which we will discuss in just a minute. These two groups are absolutely essential. You need to be able to make sure that the item that you are studying is actually doing what you think it's doing. So you need a group that is not receiving the treatment to compare to the group that is receiving the treatment to be able to discern whether the treatment is effective or not. So again, the experimental group is the one that is receiving said treatment, and the control group would be the ones that would be not receiving that treatment. Random assignment is absolutely key. You cannot just say everybody to the right, everybody to the left, meaning you can't say everybody to the right gets put in the control group and everybody in the left gets put in the experimental group. The assignments need to be totally and completely random in order to make your results viable at the end of the experiment. So the process for assigning subjects to the experimental control groups randomly needs to be done so that each subject has an equal chance of being in either group. So you cannot assign them yourselves. Everything needs to be done totally randomly. And then down here it says controls for confounding variables or extraneous or interfering. And basically what that means is this sort of prevents confounding variables from happening. And what confounding variables are is they basically are something that you did not think of in your experiment that could explain a correlation in your study. Meaning, if you are studying a certain item or a certain drug or a different behavior among subjects, a confounding variable might be something that it can explain the difference in behavior that is outside of your experiment. When you conduct these experiments, you want to try and reduce the risk for confounding variables because it makes your data that you've collected non-viable, and therefore it can't be used because it was biased. So this is why it's super important that when you are developing your projects that you try to remove as much of that confounding variable as possible and make sure that the topic you are studying can definitely be explained by the variables, the independent and the dependent variables. The experiment, an experiment is basically a deliberate manipulation of a variable to see if corresponding changes in behavior result. So the experiment is basically what you're doing. You're trying to determine the cause and effect. Does this cause this? Or if I do this, does it make people do this? So, I won't waste a lot of time talking about experiment. Obviously, you know what that is. But we'll talk about the operational definition down here. It's a definition of a variable of interest that allows it to be directly measured. So basically, if I ask you for an operational definition, what I am asking for there is how are you going to measure what you are studying? So if you are conducting the experiment we spoke about in class about dropping the wallet or the dollar bill on the ground, how are you going to measure the severity of the people taking that dollar? Or is it just going to be the number of people that take the dollar? Is it going to be the number of people that try to return the dollar? Is it going to be the number of people that leave the dollar there? Is it going to be people that tried to return the dollar for a short amount of time and kept it? Whatever it needs to be, you need to outline clearly what you are attempting to measure and make sure you put that when you're talking about your project and any psychological experiments we conduct in the future. This is absolutely crucial. All of you are seniors in this class, but some of you may still be minors. But parents or guardians of minors must absolutely positively give informed consent for their experiments. And this means they must know everything that could possibly go wrong in every aspect of your experiment beforehand. You cannot withhold anything from them. If you do, you are subject to lawsuits and all kinds of different things. So if you plan to do any of your experiments on individuals that are not 18 years old, please come see me beforehand. I would suggest trying to conduct your experiments on individuals that are not minors to alleviate concerns with informed consent. All right, let's talk real quick about independent variables and dependent variables. What an independent variable is it's something the experimenter, which in this case would be you, has control over. Something that can be directly manipulated by you, the experimenter. So these things could include like dropping money on the ground. You can control when that money is dropped. You can control how much money is dropped. And so the independent variable would be the money in that situation. The dependent variable, this is a variable in the experiment that represents the measurable response. So this would be whether the person decides to take the dollar or whether they decide to leave the dollar. Okay, so again, one more time before I move on. The independent variable is something that you can change in the experiment. The dependent variable rests solely on the actions or the measurable response of the people in the experiment. Moving on, we are almost at the end here. We'll finish off experimental methods here really quick. The placebo effect. You've probably heard of a placebo before at some point in your life, but the placebo effect is basically a phenomenon in which the participants in the study expect something to happen, so they make it happen. An example of this would be in some sort of pharmacological research study where they are studying the effects of certain medications on people. And if they tell the group that is receiving the medication that they're receiving it, and then they tell the group that they are receiving the medication and they're receiving like a sugar pill, and they show that similar signs that they are feeling better, that's a placebo effect. Meaning that the group that would get the sugar pills is saying they feel better because they think they're receiving a medication that is curing their symptoms. So in that case, they could not, without a doubt, prove that their medication is effective, since the group that is not receiving the medication is basically responding with positive aspects that the group that is receiving the medication is also responding with. So one way to alleviate this is a single blind study. And this is where subjects do not know if they are in the experimental or the control group. And this reduces the placebo effect. So basically, you give people medication and you say, here you go. Some people will receive a placebo, a sugar pill, and some people will not receive this. And you record the behaviors and the results of each. But sometimes we can be subject to observer bias, which we've already spoken about, where the experimenter themselves might give some things away. And when we're talking about experimental methods, this can be called the experimenter effect. And what this means is that the experimenter itself can unintentionally influence what's happening in the study and the data that's in the study, just because they know what's going on. And if the subjects of that study can pick up on things that the experimenter is saying, they can begin to figure out which groups they're in and what is the main motivation behind the study. So one way to alleviate this experimenter effect is called a double-blind study. And basically what this means is neither the experimenter, so the person conducting the experiment, or the people in the experiment have any idea which group they're in. They don't know whether they're in the experimental group or the control group. And this will help alleviate both the placebo effect and the experimenter effect, because neither group has any idea which group they're in, including the experimenter or the subject. In order to do this effectively, things need to be coded and tracked by a confederate. And this is basically a person that you can trust, somebody that knows which people are in which group but has no direct hand in the study, meaning they don't actually view any of the subjects and they don't record any of their behaviors. They don't view the experimenter. All they know is which people are in which groups. And at the end of the study, when all the data is collected, they decode that information, and then they see what their results are and determine whether the treatment was effective or not. This is the best way to get a true look at the data without getting any sort of contamination or bias in it. So if you would like to conduct a double-blind study, you are going to need to find a confederate, which is somebody you can trust without a doubt, that can help you with your experiment. Something we'll touch on very quickly, and just to be clear, this is what psychology says about animal research, and what the most widely accepted reasons for animal research are, is basically that we use animals in some cases for research that we could not do on humans. That may be controversial to excuse me, to some people, but the experiments that have been conducted on animals in some cases have really contributed to the advancements we've made in modern medicine that can help cure certain diseases or help treat them. One key aspect of animal research is that the benefits to humans must outweigh the hazards that the animals are exposed to. So some of these things would be tobacco and cancer correlation. So we determine to what extent tobacco causes cancer. And as you know, you are definitely more likely to develop certain forms of cancer if you are a tobacco user. Vaccines for deadly diseases. Animal testing on polio vaccines was the reason that we have cured polio. None of you have polio, and nobody has had polio in the United States in a very long time due to the treatment, or excuse me, the experiments conducted on animals through the polio vaccine. Insulin treatments for diabetes as well, and transplants. Conducting these types of experiments arguably could outweigh the hazards to which the animals are exposed to because of the benefit to humans. And as always, the researchers must act responsibly and ethically when they are conducting the animal research. You do not want to put anyone or anything through any unnecessary pain or experiments. There has to be a purpose for it, and the research has to give so much benefit to humans as opposed to the hazards to the animals. So please do not forget that, although we will not be conducting any experiments on animals in this class. So sorry for all of you that just gave a collective groan there. All right, let's talk about ethics. So, psychology, as you know, there's been some people that have done some unethical things, like put an open flame right in front of a baby and cause that baby to be scared of everything for the rest of its life. So the Institutional Review Board and institutional review boards themselves scrutinize research proposals to make sure ethical standards are maintained. And what that means is when you turn in psychological research to be published in journals or in articles or in books, there are boards that look at that information and say this was ethical, this was unethical. And that's one of the primary factors in determining whether the data continues on in the process of getting published. So if they immediately determine that your experiment is unethical, it doesn't matter how accurate your data is, they won't publish it. You must be ethical and meet the ethical standards when conducting these experiments. So some of the common ethical guidelines here, humanitarian, that's where rights and well-being of participants must be weighed against the study's value to science. So, for example, you don't want to conduct an experiment that is not going to meet the rights and the well-being of the participants. So an example of this is you're not going to infect someone with a deadly disease just to see how they react to certain treatments. We know that the disease is deadly, and we may be able to treat people that have already been infected with the disease, but infecting people with the disease is stepping over the line here on the humanitarian aspect of ethical guidelines. Obviously, don't do that, and don't ask to do that for any of your projects, because the answer definitely is going to be no. So more common ethical guidelines: informed consent. So participants must know what they are getting into, and they must have enough information where they can make an informed decision about participating in the study. You do not want to hide anything from your participants. If you do hide things from your participants and attempt to publish those studies, you're not going to have a whole lot of luck with that, because the participants must be allowed to make the decision whether they want to be a part of it or not prior to the experiment taking place. Or if you are doing a naturalistic observation and you are videotaping persons, you can receive their permission to show that videotape in your research after the fact, but you must tell them exactly what you're going to be using it for, and I would recommend writing that out and having the participant sign that. Justification. This is kind of with the naturalistic observation I was just discussing. Your deception must be justified. Meaning, if you are videotaping someone on a social experiment, you must be able to justify the fact that you didn't tell them that somebody didn't actually drop their wallet, but that you were trying to see who would take the wallet and who would leave the wallet. So you must be able to explain that in your research and to the person who is being videotaped, and you must get informed consent from that person. And you also need to tell your participants that at any time they don't want to continue in the study anymore, that they are more than willing, or they are more than able to leave the study. You cannot force individuals to continue to stay in the study if they no longer want to. So you must give your participants the right to withdraw for any study that they partake in, and you must make that well known right from the beginning. And moving on to our very last slide here, just a couple things. Risks and benefits. Participants must be protected from risks, and they need to be told of the explicitly of the risks, meaning they need to know exactly what they're being exposed to. If there's any danger at all, they need to know about it. If anything bad at all, even if it's a long shot, 1,000,000 to 1, they need to know that potentially this could happen, and this goes along with that informed consent. They need to know about anything and everything that could possibly go wrong. Debriefing. Investigator must debrief participants after the fact. So when you're finished, when you've conducted your experiment and you have all your data, you need to go to those participants and you need to tell them exactly what you did with that study and what you expect from those results. So you can't just say, hey, thanks for coming, go home. You need to pull them in and say, you were a part of the experimental group, you were a part of the control group, or the wallet wasn't dropped. We put it there to see if you were going to take it or not. Whatever the case may be, every person that was involved in the experiment needs to know who they were in that experiment, what they were exposed to, and they need to know the results of the experiment. And confidentiality. So your data must remain confidential. Even if you have permission from people to use their likeness or their names, do not use their first and last names. Call them by participant A or participant B or participant 1, participant 2. Make sure you keep confidentiality when you are conducting these experiments, because it is absolutely crucial that you do not use these participants' actual names in your projects. And very last thing here, the focus is on avoiding exposing animals to any unnecessary pain or suffering. Again, we are not going to be conducting any experiments on animals in this class, but it is absolutely crucial that you understand, if you ever do any other experiments outside of class, or you are doing any other experiments in college, if you're going to do something with animals, you cannot expose them to unnecessary pain or suffering. And animals are used in approximately about 7% of psychological studies, so they are not used all the time, but they can be used in order to promote and help the well-being of the human race. So that's it for Module 2. So go ahead, take these notes, take the notes from Module 1. You can look over those, but the quiz tomorrow, on Tuesday, the 27th of September, will just be over the information that is on Module 2. So take the rest of the period, look over the information from Module 2. The quiz will be posted on Google Classroom through Lightning Grader, and I will see you Wednesday.